Hello and welcome to the Adrian Bo Podcast, the interview series where we take a deep dive into some of the most influential minds in real estate. Hey folks, it's episode 184 of the Adrian Bo Podcast, and today's quite a special episode given that it's a collaboration with Dean Vasil, who runs the Agent Mindset Academy podcast, and it's episode number 4 for him. And we're doing something a little bit different today where Dean's going to actually interview me. So that's quite interesting on my own podcast. So Dean, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Adrian. Good. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. It's great to catch up.
Likewise.
Obviously, we've known each other for a while through the industry.
Yeah.
I've done some coaching work with you, of course, in the past as well.
Yeah.
And I know we've both got some really interesting journeys that we've been talking about over the phone, and we said, hey, let's do a podcast and collaborate. So this will appear on my platform and yours. So obviously just to be able to reach a wider audience. But at this point, I'll be on the other end of the seat where I'll be answering the questions. So,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Have you ever been on the other side, Adrian?
I have. Yeah. Funny enough, REB just emailed me because I wrote an article for them today. Yes. And they said, would you like to do a podcast about it? And I said, yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
I used to appear on the REB podcast when I was in full-time sales because obviously I was constantly in that top 100, and they obviously used to do quite a lot of interviewing there and a few other podcasts as well. But yeah, I do like to ask the questions, but very happy today to do this collaboration.
No, thank you. You, Adrian, actually, a lot of your content resonated with myself out of everyone that I've studied. Right. Growing up in the industry. Some of your content I found myself listening to, watching before appraisals a lot earlier on in my career. Your style of real estate, I think, resonates with quite a lot of agents. Right. But it's down to earth. It's something that I think you've mastered over a period of time. But I think I wanted to get you on because your story over the last couple of years has been a little bit different to the beginning of your career, from what I understand.
Sure.
But can we start from the beginning?
Sure.
What age did you get into real estate?
17. So
17.
I left school in 88.
Yeah.
And started straight away in
88.
89.
Jesus, that's when I was born.
Yeah, and started in 89. Back then, there was no such thing as verticals within property management, i.e. new business, property management and leasing. You were just in property management.
World.
Yeah.
Very different world.
I was thrown straight into that. And you just did everything. You did arrears, you did ingoings, outgoings.
Yeah.
You were leasing properties. You were doing everything. So it was just basically always a senior property management and an assistant property manager.
Yeah.
That's basically not now how you got pods and you've got all different verticals within that space. And the reality is you weren't really able to get into sales until you were a lot older, because again, there was no such thing as associates. So, you couldn't be 17, be in property management for 3 years and at the age of 20 get into sales. It just didn't work like that.
It was a very different culture back then.
Very.
Yeah.
You're talking no internet, no email, no RP data, no REA, no domain, so very different times. So I, after about 3 or 4 years of property management, was keen to do something else, but there's just no room to get into resi sales. You just didn't have that gravitas at that age, given the competition.
Was there a story behind how you got into the industry? Or
interestingly enough, I always wanted to actually just do stockbroking. So I did my work experience with Rene Rivkin when he had a company called Rivkin Limited, and then it became Rivkin James Capel. And that was in year 10. And they offered me every school holidays to go back to work there, just as a run. I used to drop off, couriers and, always go to Packer's office in Park Street and drop off things. And in those days, it was not digital. So the stock market and the stock exchange was all chalkies, So it was sort of,
I can imagine that's a very different industry today compared to what it was back then as well.
Absolutely. And so I did work every school holidays between years 11 and 12, and basically they had a job lined up ready to go for me when I left school. So I didn't study that hard at the HSC, but I also fell quite ill as well with chronic fatigue, which has been a consistency in my life.
Even from back then?
Back then, yeah.
Wow.
And unfortunately, if you missed your HSC, that's it. Like these days, if you were unwell, they'd amortise how you performed in year 11 and 12, and they'd still give you an equivalent of what back then was a HSC mark or whatever it was. So I had the job waiting. So I actually went to that job straight after school for a few months. And then there was that big crash in the late 80s, and everyone was like, no one knew what was happening. I think it was Black Friday or whatever they called it. And I used to get the bus and go to Richardson Wrench in Maroubra and then wait for my brother because he was working there. And
Marcelo.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He was working there. I used to get the bus and then he used to drive me home. I was only 17. And one day his boss said to me, mate, how's it all going at work? I said, it's good. I love it. Like that's all I wanted to do was get into stockbroking and financial markets. And I said, but mate, this massive crash has happened. No one knows if there's going to keep their jobs. He goes, how much are you getting paid? I said, $150 a week. Well, he said, I need an assistant property manager. What about if I gave you $300 a week and a company car? I said, what's the car? He said, a laser. And I said, let me have a look at it. And I popped it out and it was this bomb of a laser.
Yeah.
I said, done. But
right? And double the wage.
Double the wage, right? $300 a week.
Yeah.
So because it was very precarious in that financial market and no one knew what was going on. And then it was like, I saw these real estate agents sort of seemed to be doing quite well, even though the market was tough then because interest rates were like 17% at that time.
Yeah.
But property management was a safe space. So I did that for a number of years. And then when I wanted to evolve into sales, I couldn't because I wasn't old enough. So I got into commercial leasing. So I did that for quite a number of years.
At what age did you start commercial?
Around 20,
right,
21.
Okay.
And effectively, I made so many contacts and friendships that are still today.
Absolutely.
And I effectively lived off Oxford Street all the way from Queen Street to Hyde Park.
Yeah, well.
So because there was cafes, clubs, bars, and that's what I was specialising in. And in those days, Dean, if a shop was empty, it wasn't just paying the rent. You'd actually pay key money, not for any fixtures or fittings, just to actually get the lease.
Yeah, wow.
So on average in those days, say the early to mid 90s, you'd be paying anywhere between $200,000 to $400,000 key money just to get the key.
Wow.
Like for an empty shop.
Yeah.
And at least $4,000 a week.
Jeez.
And obviously as retail progressed, and then obviously Westfield opened in Bondi Junction, Oxford Street sort of went through a bit of a tough time much later on.
So you would have seen the area change dramatically over the years.
Huge, but I made amazing contacts.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun because I was leasing nightclubs to nightclub owners and bars to bar owners.
And the club scene would have been different back then too.
What's that?
The club scene would have been very different back then. Yeah.
Huge. I mean, so it was Oxford Street. And that's what I was focused on, and also in King's Cross itself as well. I was doing a lot of work there, so a lot of friendships today I've still got from those days, and I definitely, there's something about being born in the 70s, growing up in the 80s and partying in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's very, very a very enjoyable experience. Pre-social media,
of course.
Pre-wokeness. Was,
well, that's another topic.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
And then eventually I ended up into in resi sales. And
at what age was the residential
that
sales?
was more sort of in my later 20s.
Yeah, okay.
And I've been in the industry now a total of 35 years. And resi sales for, a good part of sort of 25 years. And fortunately was consistently doing over 100 sales every year, regardless of market conditions, due to sticking to a process, which is probably what you're talking about, which resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And how long did you hold the 100 sales a year?
consistently for 25 years.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable because a lot of agents, they start to perform well, but if you're not keeping up with every other aspect in your life, there's consistency, there's discipline, there's health. At some point, you kind of hit a wall and you start to pull back a little bit. How did you manage to consistently sell 100 properties every single year? And what age did you start to? Did you say it was your late 20s?
Probably mid to late 20s.
Late 20s. Yeah.
Well,
and you would have been the only person, or one of the only agents at that point in time,
doing that
consistently.
Consistently. Yeah. Fortunately, so I ended up number one in New South Wales and number 2 in Australia through REB. And I was constantly in that top 5, So between myself, James Tostovan, who else was there in those days? James Dack. There was like a few people in that space. And look, to answer your question, Dean, the way I did it consistently is that I focused very much on the inner marketplace, which is here, not the outer marketplace. And let me tell you, there was a lot of things happening in the outer marketplace, anywhere between the mid 90s to well into.
What do you mean
2000s.
by the outer marketplace?
Oh, interest rates high,
right,
interest rates down,
external
prices
factors,
high, prices down, elections, geopolitical factors, black swan events such as the GFC. And most recently, obviously, the pandemic. 9/11 was another black swan event. I never forget the day of 9/11. I was watching it at home in the morning, and then I went to the gym, and everyone was watching it on the TV at the gym.
Yeah.
And then I went in the office and started making some prospecting calls, and people are like, "What the hell are you ringing me for?"
Wow.
And every one of my listings got withdrawn that day.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was high school. My old man woke me up. I was like 4 or 5 in the morning. Come look at this, and then you see the second plane go through. It was nuts, but
being in business every owner withdrew their property. They just thought it was just going to be a global Armageddon.
Was it something that happened gradually, or was all of a sudden people just stopped what they were doing?
On that day, everyone withdrew.
Wow.
And I tried to prospect that day, which was my ritual, which was 2 hours of prospecting, 8:30 to 11:30. And after the 4th phone call, after being abused, I just went home. It was like, so I stayed home for a few days, and then everyone sort of started to,
How long did that take to kind of recover?
It was only about a week, I think, and then people was happy.
A little bit more information came out.
Talking again. Yeah. But I mean, I completely understand. It was a complete shock,
Of course.
It was huge.
Yeah, well. And you started initially, was your first job in sales with McGrath?
Actually, it
was it 1990?
Yeah, so I started in 94 at McGrath. I had a little bit of a start in resi sales in Maroubra at Elders. Elders were quite strong back then, especially in the east. We had Maroubra office, Randwick office, 𝐿𝐭𝐡 office. There was quite a few. So small exposure to resi, but predominantly at McGrath starting in 94. And now it's 2024, so 30 years.
Wow.
But I've been out for 3 or 4 years now out of McGrath. So, this would have been my 30th anniversary. But the good news is John and I are still very close friends, and we speak very frequently, and we catch up frequently as well.
And so you started in 1994 were you one of the how did McGrath how did that start? Were you friends with John before that, or you just kind of fell into it?
He used to actually go to my mum and dad's restaurant. And that was a place called Bobo's in Victoria Street, opposite Andiamo's Cafe, which was opposite the fire station there.
Right.
So I used to go in the restaurant there, and I sometimes used to work at night there. And so we did become friends that way. And I had signboards everywhere because I was doing commercial. And in those days it was all about signboards. So all up and down Oxford Street, I had signboards up when I was with Metro Commercial. And he said, "Man, I've been keen to do some commercial stuff. Like why don't you pop over and see if we can have a chat?" So we had a chat. So actually, when I first started at McGrath, it was to set up the commercial department.
Right.
And we did that and ended up doing really well with signboards everywhere. And after about 2 years, I really had that appetite because I had done commercial for quite some time, and I could see that things were starting to change because of the internet and e-commerce, etc. And Westfields were opening and things were changing. So then I said, look, I'm really keen to get into resi.
You're really at the forefront of the commercial when it was changing.
Yes. Yeah. And did that. And look, I mean, when I first joined McGrath, it was like obviously just the one office with myself, John, three other agents, one property manager, and one receptionist.
So really one of the OGs for McGrath.
That was it. And then it just now they're at 143 offices. Obviously an IPO in between, which I was very fortunate enough to be a foundation shareholder of. So that's sort of once in a lifetime.
Do you still hold stock?
No.
No. Okay.
So that's a once in a lifetime experience going through an IPO.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
That's got to be one of the most or one of the better success stories from an agency perspective or a brand, because McGrath really shook the industry. Back then, it was a lot of the originals. 𝐿𝐴 it was 𝐿𝐴, Elders, Ray White. Who else was back then? Which other major brands can you remember?
Well, if from the independence point of view, it was really McGrath and Di Jones that were dominating. Then Dean, there was a big gap
as a boutique franchise.
Yeah,
type of
there
thing,
was a big gap because Ray White weren't anywhere near as prolific as they are now.
Yeah.
They were in Queensland,
but
they were just starting to enter the New South Wales market. 𝐿𝐴 was definitely huge.
Yeah.
Century 21 were definitely
C21. Of course.
Were definitely big. But in the franchise space, it was really C21, 𝐿𝐴, Richardson and Wrench were actually quite dominant. Elders, that's about it, and then Ray White really started to enter into the New South Wales market.
I grew up in the Ray White network, so the family signed the franchise agreements. I think it was in 87, 88 they were trading. Yeah. 3 offices. It was Earlwood with our family.
Yes.
Then my dad's cousins in Belmore, the Ray White office in Belmore, and Punch Bowl.
Yes.
Punch Bowl is still there and kicking today. Belmore shut about 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
And then I opened it back up a couple of years ago, back in 2000. Right. 2018, I think.
But I came to see you at your
Earlwood. Yeah. So I took over the head franchise at Earlwood, and we kept the original business open, the managements, and we basically started fresh. Okay. And it was a really good thing for us. But growing up in the network, I saw it change. Yes. Dramatically. Over the years. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see those changes as they go on. But Ray White's gone from a smaller brand to just completely this massive, to the biggest franchise in Australia.
Yeah, well, you've got over 1,000 offices in 11 countries with 15,000 agents.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's crazy. And I think they're doing some good things at the moment. But, okay, so after that 25-year stint with McGrath...
26 years.
26 years. And that ended in 2019?
That's right.
2018, 2019.
Yeah, 2019.
You mentioned earlier you've struggled with chronic fatigue. Can you give me a little bit more on that? So from a very young age?
Yeah. So my first experience was during Year 12 through the HSC.
Right.
So chronic fatigue is not a medical scientific blood test type condition. Yeah. What is though is glandular fever, better known as the Epstein-Barr virus.
Right.
Okay. So that is through a blood test.
Yeah.
The Epstein-Barr virus, which usually turns into glandular fever, and if it extends long enough, then it becomes a condition called chronic fatigue syndrome.
Right.
Now, I don't want to spook everyone, but the reality is the Epstein-Barr virus lies dormant in probably about 80-90% of people walking around.
Yeah. It's probably not the only disease either.
Well, it's a virus.
Yeah. It's not the only virus that...
No, there's
a lot of
others in that family. There's others in that family as well. So they all belong... And again, I don't want to freak everyone out, but they all belong in that herpes family. I'm a bit of a medicine nerd, because for some reason I've just had a lot of conditions over the years and just studied medicine and I love it, and my dream one day is to actually go and study medicine and become a doctor. Actually,
that's interesting. Well,
So because my nickname at my doctor's surgery is Dr. Bo.
Right. Okay.
Because people tell me how they're feeling and what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'll give them a diagnosis. And my doctor always calls me or texts me and says, "Mate, you nailed it. You got it right."
Isn't that interesting when you really study something that you're passionate about?
Yeah.
You can almost become an expert in the field.
Yeah.
Are you more pulling towards the conventional way of medicine, or are you both?
Definitely
Okay.
both. Look, you have to. When you go through something like a virus which is dormant and then becomes active when you become run down, and you're burning the candle at both ends. So obviously during school, I was very focused on academia. I was an A-grade student up until sort of year 10, 11, then got unwell, and that was very disappointing for me because I really wanted to go to university.
How old were you when you
17.
got unwell?
So I was 16.
Right.
But I was very lucky and fortunate enough at a later stage in life to actually do 2 degrees, an undergraduate and a master's degree, because there was that pebble in my shoe, Dean. I just had to do it,
Yeah.
So I did that, more in my sort of late 20s, while I was working. But in saying that, when you go through something like that, and it's subsequently. It's happened 4 times in my life since then.
Are you kidding?
And the most recent was just last year, where I had an entire 12 months off because of it. So that was the most debilitating. Actually, last year's episode was the most debilitating.
Is there some because you were a little bit older?
No, I'd burnt out for whatever reason. So the first episode was school, studying too hard, and starting to sort of go out a little bit and partying a little bit. And then the second one was sort of when I was like a top agent and I was really into the party scene and I was working, training, partying. So that sort of knocked me out. But that was only sort of 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And back then when you're a little bit younger, you can somewhat overdo it. You can party hard and then wake up the next morning, go straight to work.
But it's for anyone who's been through chronic fatigue, it's literally like you can't get out of bed. But this most recent one was physical stress, emotional stress. It was everything, and it knocked me out for a long time. And in saying that, yes, so holistic and non-conventional medicine plays a huge part of it. So
of course.
I'm a bit of an expert when it comes to supplements and that type of thing, as well as conventional medicine, and you need a combination of both,
absolutely.
I think, for anything. So I still still to this day I'll probably take about 40 different supplement pills a day, and I take some conventional medicine as well.
Yeah, of course. It's amazing how things changed after COVID. I guess everyone's a little bit more self-aware. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, self-aware in regards to the conventional medicine side of things and poor diet, chemicals in our foods, just that whole bunch of different things. And I think they play a role.
Definitely.
I think they definitely play a role.
Definitely. Well, look, I mean, during COVID, I was seen as a complete pariah and outcast because I refused to get the vaccine. And I was also a huge Donald Trump fan and was also seen as an outcast for that as well. Yeah. And now
that's starting to change, though. That's starting to change.
It's massively changed.
Which is a good thing, I think.
Massively changed. Yeah. So there's no one that didn't get the vaccine that regrets it. I can guarantee you that. Yeah. There's a lot of people that did get the vaccine that were defiant initially because they didn't want to admit it, but now they are quite regretful. I mean, I just took on a new coaching client the other day, Dean, who said that when he's just launched his own buyer's agency, but when he was at the buyer's agency firm he was with, they mandated the vaccine.
That's unbelievable.
And he immediately got myocarditis from it. Immediately.
Does it still affect him today?
Sorry?
Does it still affect him today?
Yeah. So he's got to be on medication.
Isn't that sad though? Like it was just it's all of a sudden the world went from one thing to something completely foreign and no one really knew how to navigate. But it really opened my eyes to a lot of different things, especially some people. But those who were very loud about, COVID, the vaccine, everything back then, somewhat a little bit quiet today.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we're kind of getting past it. But I think it's one bad thing has led to, in my opinion, a good thing, because it's just changed people's perspective a little bit on what we're told, what we're fed, what we're consuming on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I think there's still a long way to go, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
I think I was pretty fortunate because I actually knew this wasn't the first novel, like they call it a novel virus.
Yeah.
I mean, it was called SARS-CoV-2 for a reason, because a few years before that there was SARS-CoV-1, which was actually SARS.
Yeah,
you know?
right, yeah.
They called it the SARS virus. And instead of a vaccine, they stockpiled Tamiflu, which is an antiviral, which you can get antivirals now for COVID, but you've got to be over a certain age, 55.
Yeah, right.
So they pretty much did the same thing where the drug companies sold, millions of boxes of Tamiflu to countries, but it wasn't as big of a media issue. And I mean, the reality is in Australia, you've got 3,000 people that die every year anyway.
Yeah, of course.
Of ammonia or some sort of virus, you know. So it's not unusual for people to unfortunately pass away.
Yeah, of course.
From some sort of respiratory illness, which COVID was. But obviously it's, I don't want to sort of go down the rabbit hole, but there was a factor of control involved. There was a factor of pharmaceutical companies literally making trillions of dollars.
Yeah, of course.
And there was a factor of a huge rush for a vaccine within 10 months, when everyone knows any medication, a vaccine or a pill. Well, it's 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's 10 years of R&D, 5 years of animal trials, and then 5 years of human trials. That's the standard practice. And if there's a side effect rate of 1 in 100,000, it gets pulled immediately. With the COVID vaccine, it was 1 in 800, and they didn't pull it.
It's unbelievable.
So, the injuries today are just, horrific. And
well, if there's one thing we can take from Trump, change of power, what really surprised me, and I actually thought it was a joke. I actually thought it was just something that was going around the internet and X or on Twitter, was the fact that Fauci was pardoned.
Yeah.
From 2014.
Yeah.
11th hour.
Well, no, 5 minutes to go of Biden's presidency, and he did it while Trump was making his speech. So
if that wasn't premeditated, I don't know.
Well, the thing is, what's he pardoned for?
You don't know.
That's
we
exactly
don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
We just know from 2014.
Yeah. Well, we do know because there is enough information out there, and it's because of the gain of function research. So gain of function research has been happening for years, where they're basically playing Frankenstein with animals and humans, and creating these viruses in order to create a vaccine for it. But they claim that they do it purely for research and development, and if something happened or whatever. And just the reality is it leaked from the lab, and it was Chinese New Year that weekend, and you had 5 million people fly out of China, including Wuhan, that weekend that it leaked. So, when you have 5 million people fly out of one country into the rest of the world, it's going to spread like wildfire.
Crazy time. So it was a crazy time.
It was just unfortunate litany of events,
Unbelievable. I'm kind of looking forward to the next 4 years. What that looks like for Australia, I still don't know. Speaking about Trump and change of power in the US, he's very America only, which is good for them. I don't know what that looks like for us so far.
I think one good thing for us, Dean, is there will be some posturing from Trump and the US towards the CCP, and we've got to remember that they're very close neighbours to us. It's inevitable that he'll the CCP will want to invade Taiwan, because it's the same theory as Russia and Ukraine. Like Russia just tells their people that Ukraine was always part of Russia. We're just reclaiming it.
Yeah.
So exact same methodology and propaganda goes out from the CCP to the Chinese population. Is that Taiwan's always been ours? We're just going to reclaim it.
Yeah.
So that's inevitable. And then you got to look at what's happening in the South China Sea, where they're just building not just platforms, but they're actually dredging out and building like full-on huge, massive islands with military bases, and that's very, very close to us. So we need to be part of everything possible. We need to be part of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, of course.
We need to be allies with the US and the UK.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you now, I know a lot of people in the military, and if something was to happen on a global scale,
Not prepared.
it wouldn't be a matter of months whether we would survive or not. It wouldn't even be a matter of weeks. In terms of artillery, anywhere from rifles to missiles, it would be hours.
Wow.
Hours.
Wow.
That's so without support.
Isn't that
from anyone
scary?
else. Well, we're an island, mate,
Yeah.
far away,
Very far away.
isolated from it. We're not a continent. And unfortunately, there's been some bad decisions made at a political level. You've only got to look at the 𝐿𝐴 deal. Like they tore up those nuclear subs. We would have had them in 2 years' time if Morrison didn't tear up the one with the French president there. Now we've got to start all over again. We're not going to see anything for another decade at least. And
Big waste of
it's
cash.
minimum
as well.
to have a couple of nuclear powered subs. Like it's just, but anyway, that's I'm sort of.
We can probably see you
fascinated
talking
with
about
that.
it for days.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with a lot of those topics.
I've been following the US politics very closely over the last maybe 6 to 8 months, and it's just I think they're in good for a good next 4 years, and but what that means for us, we'll wait.
Look, we've always been a very close ally.
Yeah.
You've only got to look at the 20th century, and we.
I think we need some better
supported-
leadership here, though.
There's no doubt.
so
But
then,
we've always been allies with the US. That's never going to change.
No, of
and
course.
the UK.
Yeah.
We're obviously part of the Commonwealth. That's never going to change, and that's why the referendum failed dismally when they tried to do that.
Of
to
course,
become
yeah.
a republic. I mean, it's just insane. Why would you? Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. Why would you want to not be part of the republic?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
you only got to look at Brexit. That happened, and then everyone regretted it afterwards. All the English regretted it. They were like, wow. It was like, well, you voted for it, or you didn't vote and you should have, So I think we just got to make sure that we just remain allies to everyone we possibly can, and because we've got, even though I say we're a bit short on artillery and ammunition, we might only last hours or whatever. We've got a pretty strong foundation, militarily, and we do a lot of good work with the US when it comes to that, and the Brits as well. So we can definitely build on that. But you're right, it's all about leadership and dedicating a much healthier budget towards military and defence. And unfortunately, with all the woke madness that's been going on, the money's been going in the wrong direction. I mean, you've only got to look at the referendum for the voice. I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on what? It was just mental. Imagine just putting that into military and defence. It was just the most unnecessary, political initiative that anyone could have undertaken. It was ridiculous.
It's in one aspect, it's all about the votes and for them to stay in power. But some of the stuff I'm seeing is just like it's nuts. It's crazy. Like especially with this woke agenda, surely there's not that many people who'd continue to support whoever's in power at that point in time, so that they can continue to gain power. I mean, from what I think and from what I understand now, there's going to be a change of government here in Australia because everyone's just had enough. So I don't know what it is. I'll be being governed by an external factor. I don't know.
I just think it's lazy politics, Dean. That's all it is. It's just, they're just happy with the status quo. Like they'll just make something up like this voice thing and say, well, Indigenous people just don't have enough representation, which is not true at all. Out of there's 12 members of parliament which are Indigenous, which represents 4% of the parliament, and the Indigenous population in Australia is like 3%. So they're actually nothing against Indigenous people whatsoever. Like I've got Indigenous friends,
of course,
but they are overrepresented already. Not to mention there's over 3,000 registered Indigenous charities and organisations already, not to mention the budget that's allocated to them, which is, I think around $11 billion a year.
Yeah.
So, look, it was just a distraction, and I think it was just one person, who had an idea, and it failed dismally, like most referendums do.
Yeah. We'll get back to the real estate side of things, but so we can sit there and talk about this for hours.
Yeah, sure.
Honestly, there's just so much that we can go through. But from back when you were, so did you suffer from that virus when you were younger, Adrian?
Yeah,
you did.
So at school, then during the peak of my career, and then most recently, like last year.
So a few times.
Yeah,
that led to the chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
How long did that last? And how quickly did it come on?
Yeah.
How did it affect you throughout your career? Because that would have been hard to stay consistent selling 100 properties a year.
Yeah.
And then to go through those health issues.
Yeah.
Can you run me through?
Yeah, absolutely. So effectively, initially, when you find out that you've got the Epstein-Barr virus, and then you end up with glandular fever, and then it ends up being chronic fatigue, you see it as an absolute curse.
Yeah.
Because you must stick to a certain diet, you must stick to a certain way of life, otherwise the virus is going to just keep reappearing. Right?
Yeah.
So that was the story I was telling myself for a long time. This is just a curse. Why me? And
that victim mentality.
Then I had a paradigm shift, and I was like, actually, this is a blessing because I'm forced now where I'm not a big drinker. I eat well. I'm not going. No way I'm going to do the sort of partying I did back in the days.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not going to do those sort of hours, like I was doing 7 days a week, 14, 16-hour days, like crazy stuff. It's just completely unsustainable, and I proved it was unsustainable because I had burned out on multiple occasions, And the most recent one, was the longest because all the others were sort of 3 to 6 months. But the most recent was like close to 12 months.
Yeah.
It was really 10 months, but then on the 10th month, when I was just about to get back into, my business, which is coaching and auctions, I fell down some stairs at Double Bay and snapped my ankle.
I saw that.
In 5 different places.
Oh,
so my right foot's full of metal pins and plates.
Wow.
And that stood me up for another 2 months, as I was really ended up no income and no work for like 12 months. And, it challenges you. Lucky I'm a man of faith, so I do believe that God allocates his toughest battles to his strongest warriors.
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned that in my first podcast.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
a strong believer of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, he gives his hardest challenges to his strongest soldiers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lucky I'm a practicing Stoic as well.
Yeah.
So I was prepared. I was prepared this time,
Yeah.
And Stoicism teaches us that it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you interpret it and what you do about it. So that's only one of many, many, many components of Stoicism.
Yeah.
So I was a lot more prepared. But in saying that, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some dark days.
Of course, yeah.
Because also throughout most of my adult life, I've also suffered mental health. And luckily, today I'm fine. I'm very functional and operate a business. And even during being a high performance agent, there was mental health issues.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And now that I'm a full-time coach and auctioneer, I can tell you now that I wouldn't say most, but many coaching sessions I have almost become counselling sessions.
Yeah.
And thank God I've been equipped, because I've sat in front of that many psychologists and psychiatrists, and I know a lot about medication and natural supplements and things that can help people. I've literally talked people from out of suicide. And don't get me wrong, I got to disguise. I'm not a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist or anything like that, but I've literally had situations like that.
I think when you've experienced that, and you've gone through something like that and you've come out of it many times, I think that's the best way to help others, because it's one thing speaking to a professional, but have they gone through that exact thing that you're sitting there trying to get help from? And in our industry, it looks glamorous, but it can be really, really tough. I don't know what it is, but it's that gap that I'm trying to promote. And when did you start to experience certain
mental health?
Your mental health aspects.
Well, it usually starts in your childhood, but you don't actually know what it's called. So in my adult life, when I started seeing a psychologist, I started telling him about when I was a kid and I was sort of feeling a certain way, which was sweats, stomach cramps, ruminations, like mental ruminations.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's anxiety, but you didn't even know what that word meant or that it even existed back then, right? So
how old were you at that point in time?
I would have been probably 12, 13, something like that. So
the word anxiety and kids scares me. It's something that worries me, especially with my two kids. And there's no right or wrong, but it's hard. And did you see someone back then? Or
no, because
you don't know.
There wasn't. I mean, mental health was it wasn't even talked about.
No, it was about toughen up.
Yeah, it wasn't even talked about. In fact, not long before that. So I was born in the 70s. I mean, in the early 70s. So as an adult, if you suffered mental health, you would get shock treatment, electric shock treatment, and they would you'd just be hospitalised basically. There was no such thing as medications or antidepressants. That didn't start until very late 70s, early 80s. The first round of antidepressants were in the tricyclic family. Now they've got SSRIs, SNRIs, and melatonin-based antidepressants, etc. But I mean, it's a huge issue in this country because we're very lucky with Medicare and everything. There's no. Don't get me wrong. And if you speak to any American, they revere that. But with mental health, there's a huge issue because if you've got an issue with mental health, if you wanted to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it's 6 months. 6 months wait. Yeah.
Right.
So therefore, the first point of call is your GP.
Yeah.
So now GPs who were never really equipped to deal with mental health are now prescribing antidepressants like regularly. Basically every day.
Yeah.
And they're not really getting to the real issue of what's creating the anxiety or the depression. What condition is it? Like there's so many conditions. So my diagnosis later on in life ended up being OCD, and that's one vertical of mental health. And people talk flippantly about OCD. Oh yeah, I've got OCD because I'm constantly like cleaning the house.
No, it's a lot more than that. Yeah. It's a lot more than that. Yeah,
it's a serious mental condition.
Yeah,
I mean, sure, it has got to do with like going back home and checking the stove that you left on. That's part of it.
Yeah,
but it's really about the constant mental rumination of thoughts in your mind and that constant voice in your head. and you're constantly battling with it.
Yeah.
And, luckily today, due to cognitive behavioural therapy, I know how to deal with all that.
Yeah, right.
And I can actually teach other people as well.
Just turn it off.
Well, no, you can't turn it off. You can't turn it off.
Yeah.
The best analogy I can give you is the movie The Fight Club, if you remember, with Ed Norton, Brad Pitt.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't learn until the end of the movie that Brad Pitt was actually a fictitious character. He didn't actually exist.
Yes, correct.
He was Ed Norton's dark side and voice in his head. Often psychologists call it the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
So what the wolf in sheep's clothing or Brad Pitt did in that movie was seduce the hell out of Ed Norton, make him doubt himself, like completely gaslighted himself, right? And this is what happens every day. So if we walk out of here and see a homeless person in the CBD or whatever, they were a normal working, functional person, but their wolf fully took over the sheep.
Yeah.
And they've lost control of their dark side. We all have the dark side.
Yeah, of course.
So whether it's called the shadow, the voice, the wolf in sheep, we've all got it, and it's constantly there. So it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
So what cognitive behavioural therapy teaches you is to listen to the voice that's seducing you to do stupid stuff, doubting you that you're not good enough, and all this sort of stuff, but to disrespect it and to learn that it's actually fiction, not fact. Just because you're thinking of it, our default response is to think that it's fact.
Yeah.
But what CBT teaches you is to challenge it and think, okay, this is actually a separate entity within me, because we do have a separate entity, right?
Yeah.
We've got this dark side, this shadow, this wolf in sheep's clothing. So you've got to look at it as a separate entity, or perhaps even another person that you disrespect in your life. And we all know people that we wouldn't take advice from.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at it like that and say, hang on, what you're saying, that's not necessarily right. I'm going to challenge that. I reckon that's fiction, and I reckon you're wrong, and I'm going to disrespect you. And so that's the only real way to deal with it.
Was that hard to learn? Was that
very?
Yeah. How long did it take you?
5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years.
Hearing you say that, it's almost like there's a lot of people out there that they're probably sitting there battling themselves. They're battling with themselves.
Yeah, the voice. They're battling with the voice.
They go to sleep full of motivation. I'm going to do this tomorrow. I'm going to do that. They go to bed feeling one thing, wake up completely different. And then it's a cycle. It's a cycle. It sets you back. Certain goals that you might set one day are not necessarily important to you the next.
Yeah.
Is that similar to what?
Yes, because it's an erratic type and manic type of behaviour.
Yeah. And
you've got to learn to control, and that's why meditation is such a beautiful practice. I mean, it's a 4,000-year-old initiative, so it's not hocus pocus.
Yeah.
You know, I meditate as well. I mean, so meditation is not dissimilar. Where these days you can just do it through an app, but I did a proper transcendental meditation course where you're allocated a mantra, like a unique mantra, and all it is sitting there, whether it's 5 minutes or 20 minutes, and repeating the mantra as a distraction. But thoughts come into your head all the time.
Yeah, of course I do. Yeah.
And they teach you not just to just get the thoughts out of your head. You can't. You've got to indulge the thought, and you've got to allow it to come into your brain. But then if you focus back on that mantra and just repeat the mantra in your mind, then the thought will slowly fall away.
Yeah.
Now, these thoughts during meditation, some of them can be good and bad.
Yeah.
It's just, with OCD, they're always bad.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're not good enough, you're not old enough, you're not young enough, you should be taking this drug, you should be going out partying, you should have everyone like you, you should be doing this on social media. So ego is a big part of it as well.
And it's your mind's constantly racing.
Yeah. And look, when I say it took me a long time to learn it, don't get me wrong, I haven't mastered it. Like it still happens to this day where I'll have days where I'm having that battle and that conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does get you, and it does seduce you, you know, and you have bad days. That's just part of the journey.
And it plays with your confidence.
It can do.
Yeah.
Confidence. It can play. It can interrupt your work. It can interrupt relationships. It interrupts friendships. It interrupts family. Everything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a lot more common than what we are. Yeah, it is. It has to be
huge.
It has to be. Like
the stats tell us that one in three people either have or will suffer from some sort of mental illness,
health,
whether it's anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, whatever it is. This, and I think that's getting closer now to 2 in 3 from my research.
Something that I've always thought about is, let's assume we grew up in the 50s or the 60s. Were things different back then? Why?
Yes.
What's happening in our society today that's allowed this to become a lot more common to the point where it's affecting people.
Yeah.
It's not easy to go through.
Absolutely. If you look at photos of people in the 50s and 60s, they're all slim. A lot of them smoked.
Yeah.
But there were no chemicals in foods or products at all.
Yeah.
So the cancer rates were like nothing compared to what they are now.
Yeah.
Nothing. People were outdoors a lot more. There was no internet. There was no social media.
Yeah.
So the internet obviously keeps people indoors, and social media creates comparison.
Yeah.
Now, comparison is the thief of all joy and creates a huge amount of
In
mental
today's
illness.
society, definitely, yeah.
Massively, because you're only viewing snippets of people's lives that are the glamorous parts, but you're not seeing the other parts of their lives, right? Unless there's some really authentic people on social media who show both.
Yeah.
And I do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I show a bit of both.
Yeah.
And I think, that's just part of my journey. And some people say it's controversial. Some people say I shouldn't, whatever. But look, that's my journey. I'm a 53-year-old adult. I've had a lot of adversity in my life. I've had a lot of challenges. I'll make my own decisions on how I want to live my life. And so it's definitely a huge issue. And that's why in the 50s and 60s you didn't have as much mental health issues. You didn't have as much cancer.
Yeah.
It was a very, very different time.
I think today's food and everything that we consume, not just mentally but physically, is affecting our DNA
Completely.
moving forward. It's changing the way we're evolving as humans.
Completely.
Some people might see this and listen to this and laugh, but it's a fact. It's a fact.
We both know, Dean, I mean, you come from a Greek background, I come from an Italian background. We know that there's things known as blue zones.
Yeah, of course.
Now, these blue zones have got, people in both of our native countries that are living 100 years and older.
Off the land.
But living... Not just like living in a nursing home. These people are active in society, and they're growing food and then eating it. They don't stress about owning 10 investment properties. And like the turnover of real estate in Europe is extremely low. Like I never forget when I visited Europe a few times. And what do you do? I sell real estate. How many homes do you sell? 100, about 100. Is that like the whole of Australia, or that you're selling 100 homes? Like they just can't believe it. Because
of course.
People don't sell in Europe, man. It's like stays in the same family for like 10 generations.
We're obsessed with the real estate here. Like it's even in the States as well, but
we're
especially in
obsessed
Australia.
with capitalism.
Yeah. Well, correct.
Yeah,
correct.
And we're obsessed.
That's the best way to put it. Yeah.
We're obsessed with what's next.
Yeah.
Where in Europe, as you know, people live for the day.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, am I happy today? Am I going to eat today? Am I going to laugh today? Am I going to spend time with family and loved ones
of
today,
course.
and tomorrow's a different story.
Yeah.
I'm not stressed about work or saving or they're just
It's a different world.
Completely different.
We just got back. We spent about 4 months there with the wife and the kids, and honestly, after about 1 or 2 weeks, it was just like something happens to you.
Yeah.
Like it's just either the sun, the food,
It's
something
everything.
happens to you.
Yeah.
And then I could have stayed there longer.
Yeah.
I came back to Sydney, and within a couple of weeks, I started to feel off again.
Yeah.
And it's just unbelievable the way the world works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a completely different mentality there.
Yeah.
And it would have been even more so back in the day when our parents, were born there and migrated here. But they even at some stage thought they wanted a better life.
Yeah.
But if you ask them today, would they admit that it was the right decision? Hard to tell.
Yeah.
Hard to tell.
No, of course.
And
then you see them, there's some great success stories, but especially from like a family I've come from, they've done quite well, but they've just, it's almost, they're not enjoying themselves. They've found a way to work hard, but that's it. What's next? Why did you come? Why did you? What was you wanted a better life? Okay, great. You've worked like a dog day and night to get it. What do you do after it? That's right. What do you do with it?
Yeah.
It's just there's no enjoyment.
Yeah.
And to it, like some might think this is from the outside looking in, but our childhood was fucked. Like it was all, excuse the language, but it was almost like it was traumatic. It was. It's a little bit hard to explain. And there's
I get it, because you had migrants living in a different country where they were still learning the culture, still learning the language. There was still racism.
Yeah.
We both would have got called wogs at school, all the time, and it wasn't pleasant. And even myself, I was born as an Adriano. And my name's Adrian now because not just the students were making fun of me, the teachers were.
Yeah, well.
Teachers were fully writing me off.
Yeah.
Going like, mate, that's a wog name and this and that. Imagine that happened now.
Yeah.
Or imagine being born an Adriano now. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, my son's, his name is spelt fully, it's a Greek name, it's Pantelis.
Right.
And then my nephew's 𝐿∨ my niece, everything. Like it's
But
different
that's cool
today.
now.
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
culture.
Yeah.
It's culture.
But back then, man, like I used to come home crying every night, and I just had no choice to drop the O.
Yeah,
And,
I think us as I think we just missed it, or we just started to see the end of that.
I was in the thick of it, mate.
Yeah, you would have been.
When you're born in the 70s.
Of course. Yeah.
Very, very different.
Yeah,
But look, it wasn't necessarily our parents' fault. It was a massive drive from the US, Australia, and Canada after the war to bring Europeans. Because all those countries desperately needed culture.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And the best thing about the European,
they built the country.
Totally.
Yeah,
They had no culture, no food, nothing, So the European settlement, there was a massive initiative, massive incentives, and your dad will tell you the story, everyone will tell you the story that they got on the boat with one bag and and the one shirt and
one shoe and
ad nauseum they'll tell you this story.
Every time the story comes, it's like one less item.
That's right. But they'll tell you the story, and it took 3 months to get here.
Yeah.
But you've got to give it to them. They were seeking a better life, but who's to say that the life they left behind wasn't equally as good, if not better?
Yeah.
It was just a major drive from the US, Canada, and Australia to desperately seek culture, because they just didn't have it.
And now they've come here for a better life, leaving where they've come from, and now our generation, it's almost like we want to leave here
and go
back.
There.
It's
true.
just and sometimes it gets me thinking, like, are we a little bit weaker than what they were? I don't think so. It's not the case. But it's just your mind races. Why is it? It's just like...
Oh, look, there's no doubt. I mean, thoughts come across my mind every day.
We're much luckier than what they were, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think so.
You could definitely see yourself
living in a village in Italy or Greece and just sort of, waking up and strolling down to the piazza and having your cafe and the breakfast
Yeah, of
and
course.
then going on the beach and then maybe working for a few hours and then, especially now it's all remote and whatever, and then just chilling out and, having a glass of wine at night and a nice dinner and, and like at a certain age, I think everyone's probably going to reach that point. I mean, I don't know if you saw the third Equalizer movie where Denzel Washington, he was like in the CIA all his life and everything, but he ends up in literally an Italian village living this life because he just wanted to escape everything. And every day he'd do the same thing. He'd walk down and, just have his coffee and he wanted to stay out of trouble. He just wanted to do his thing. And then something happens and he gets sucked back in and into this life. And but for years he was just living his dream from having such a hectic, I mean, it's a fiction movie, obviously, but it's still it wouldn't be that far from
it's the story of it, Story, people can resonate with people, but it's funny because you can do that over there. You can just get up every day, go have your coffee, walk around, come back, and continue to do it every single day, and be happy with it. You do that here, you lose your mind.
That's
you
right.
stay home, you lose your mind, and it's
well, you'd be constantly comparing yourself. Go, hang on, they're working, they're working more money, they're buying more property, they're this, they're that, they're that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, in saying that now,
it's almost like capitalism has become a mental thing.
Yeah, But in saying that now, as you know, in Greece and Italy, the work ethic of what our parents is not like it is there now. Like everyone's dream in Greece and Italy and a lot of parts is to work for the government, right? Because they've got the best jobs. It's and a lot of it is nepotism, so it's like passed down from like if your father was in that job for the government, then you would get. It's very hard to get those type of jobs. If it's not that, then you're just working in small business.
Yeah, of course.
And that's seasonal because it's tourism based. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So their dream now is not necessarily not everyone. I'm just making a generalisation, but a lot of people's dream who are growing up in Italy and Greece now is to work for the government, get a cushy job, and have a good lifestyle.
Be comfortable.
Just be comfortable.
Yeah, of course.
So it's interesting.
Can we go back, Adrian, to you? You've spoken about your health and the mental health, and I think that's a big thing. And I'd probably say we can probably have a part 2 to this. To have to sit down for another hour or two.
Sure.
But to fast forward, going through all that to your to McGrath at 2019, you made headlines. That was probably a big thing for you. Can you tell me what happened?
I can tell you certain things because I've signed NDAs and things.
Understandable,
that I can't say, but what's objectively true and was well publicised, I can tell you, which was. There was an accusation that I said something to someone, and you got to remember this is right in the Harvey Weinstein Me Too movement, right in the thick of it.
Yeah, right
in the thick of it. So there was a claim that I said something to a colleague, and I'm just thinking what I can say. Because this is all been...
It's well publicised. Yeah.
So there was an accusation that happened. Now, that was dealt with. And I remained at McGrath. And when I say it was dealt with, it was... All I can say is there was nothing enough there for me to be terminated.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
But then 2 years later, there was another accusation that I said something to a male colleague.
I think that's what's
that
been
was the one that
more publicised.
Yeah. And
did you know this colleague for a while, or was it?
I recruited the person.
Right. Okay.
How
long he was there for? How long was he for?
Only about 12 months. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And all I can say legally in that manner was that. The board at the time, because it was a public company, did decide that it was appropriate for me to resign.
Yeah, right.
Okay. After 26 years and still at that particular time being a significant shareholder of the business. So that caused a lot of anxiety.
I can imagine.
And obviously a lot of pain for me, like obviously, you know, putting 26 years of my life into a business, being one of the foundation shareholders, etc. So I went into a deep, dark depression, you know, for 3 months.
Yeah.
But then after that, I dusted myself off, really, really immersed myself into Stoicism, Catholicism, and started a bootstrap business, which is still today Adrian Bo Coaching and Training.
Is that when that started?
Right. Which is an incredible business. You know, now an incredible business, and I'm completely on purpose. I answer to nobody.
Yeah.
I've got an incredible roster of coaching clients during the week, and an incredible roster of agents that I call auctions for on the weekends, you know?
Yeah.
And I enjoy every minute of it,
Yeah.
you know? So rather than a curse, now I see it as a blessing. Now I think a big part of Stoicism is labelling outcomes too quickly. So in 2019, I was very quick to label that as a shit outcome.
Yeah, of course.
But with the benefit of hindsight, I'm labelling that now as a terrific outcome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
So my advice to everyone is if something does happen to you, just hold off labelling it as a good or a bad outcome, right? Because
it's your path.
It's just an outcome.
Yeah.
The only terrible outcome is when we're six feet under.
Yeah, I get you.
Or if we get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Yeah, of course.
That's the only terrible outcome.
Yeah.
But anything apart from that is just an outcome. We don't know whether it's good or bad yet. But we're very quick to label it as bad. But years later, it's like, wow, that was great, actually.
Yeah.
Right? So that's my advice to people, and that's certainly a big part of Stoicism is to not label outcomes. And there's a little fable about it as well, which I'll just indulge you with, which was like, which will help explain a little bit better, which is, you know, a farmer had a horse that was a working horse and was working the land. It took off, and the neighbour said to him, "Oh man, that's terrible, man. How are you going to work the land and all that?"
I've heard this, yeah.
And the guy goes, "Well, I don't know yet. Let's see what happens." Anyway, about a week later, the horse comes back with an extra 4 horses, right? And then he gets 4 horses to work the land. And his neighbour said to him, "How good's this? You got 4 now." And he's like, "Well, let's see what happens," right? Then one of the new horses, the son tried to break it in, right, and calm it down. And while doing that, he got thrown off the horse and broke his leg. And the neighbour said to him, "Shit, that's really bad, man. Like that's terrible." And the owner said, "Well, let's see." Then the war came along, and he was excluded because he broke his leg. Otherwise, he would have got conscripted.
Yeah, right.
So the neighbour said, "Wow, isn't that a good outcome?" And it's on and on.
Yeah, yeah.
So that just gives you a bit of an idea.
Yeah, of course.
You can keep going
Absolutely,
with it about outcomes.
That would have helped the mental state as well.
Yeah.
Going through all that. And you started to practice the Stoicism at that point in time, or shortly after?
Oh no, I immersed myself into Stoicism in the 2019 period. Yeah, totally. And the leading spokesperson of Stoicism is Ryan Holiday. He's written the most books about it. Tim Ferriss is also a huge advocate of Stoicism. So if anyone was interested, you know, Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday are both outstanding to follow. Either on podcasts or read their books or whatever. It's you know, the famous original Stoics were the Greeks and the Italians. So Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and they were a mixture of people. One was a slave, one was a politician, one was a Roman emperor, right? And they all wrote a lot, and they didn't even know that it was Stoicism. They wrote a lot of what they call today meditations, but they're actually just stories.
And a lot of what they practiced back then is still, it's more relevant today than ever.
Well, most modern psychology is based on stoicism, and even cognitive behavioural therapy. All of it is still based on that original foundation.
Yeah. And where next? What next for Adrian Bo?
I just keep doing what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. I'm completely on purpose, adding value, coaching during the week, calling auctions on the weekend. I'm absolutely happy with that. You know, I've got my own business. I answer to no one. You know, it's constantly evolving. You know, I'm constantly meeting new clients, and you know, I'm making a difference.
Yeah.
I'm really am.
And you're working with some really high performing agents, and some that have been in the industry for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And for you know their willingness to continue to be coached and learn is
it's incredible.
I find it inspiring.
It's incredible. They still come to you, and they're still humble enough to want to grow and learn.
Yeah.
And I admire them for that, and they're the ones that are the most consistent. You know, because part of my program is they've got to submit their accountability numbers every week. You know, one of my top clients, as everyone knows, is Josh Teslon. Sells 350 properties a year. He does not miss a week.
He's on a different level.
He does not miss a week where he sends me his accountability numbers, and he doesn't miss a coaching session. So, like, you know, that says it all. You know, like just the humility.
And I think that's what I'm trying to do, because you know we've spoken about aspects of health, mental, physical, but to stay consistent in this industry, and I think we're blessed to be in an industry that can be so fruitful.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a good balance. You like to call it harmony. There needs to be a work-life harmony.
Work-life harmony. Yeah. I mean, work-life balance is a complete misnomer. It doesn't exist. Not in real estate, not in any serious industry.
I thought it did until I knew it didn't.
No, you just got to find a harmony that works for you individually, and a frequency that works for you. But there'll never be a balance.
It's a lifestyle.
How can there be a balance?
There can't be.
You're either working too much and not being healthy enough, or you're being too much on health or family and then not working. It's never going to be there. None of it is right or wrong.
No, you just need to find that right, something that works for you and your family. It's a gap that I want to try and fill from aspects of health, wealth, your career. There's a lot of agents that are struggling. Mentally, physically, and a massive one. This industry might look glamorous, but a lot of agents aren't actually making enough to survive.
I agree.
A lot of them have what it takes. It's just they don't. They're performing for a few months, and then that performance is, they see the money coming in, but they're not prospecting for that 3 months, then the next 3 months is going to be a dry period.
That's right.
So I want to try and get in the trenches with them, and see what I can give back and.
Good for you.
Good for you, mate.
That's a very altruistic attitude to have. So it sounds like we'll need to do part 2.
I'd love to.
So, folks, we're going to wrap up now. And Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you. Likewise.
Being interviewed by you, and there's definitely a part 2 here. So
there has to be.
We'll book it in.
Yeah.
And it's been an outstanding conversation to have, and I really appreciate the openness and definitely the humbleness around the
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it. And likewise for the opportunity to sit down with me. And guys, stay tuned. There's a lot more that I'd like to go through with Adrian. There's a lot more to his story and also what we're trying to achieve in the industry. So, Adrian, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Good to see you.